I thought I was losing my mind. Things kept disappearing. Conversations I never had. Appointments I never made. My wife Sarah would look at me with worry in her eyes while my best friend Mark suggested I needed help. But it was all a lie. They were gaslighting me, working together to make me seem crazy. I found Sarah's hidden phone with all their secret messages. They laughed at my breakdown, planning to lock me away in a mental hospital so they could take my inheritance and be together. My own wife and best friend, plotting to erase me from my life. They thought I was weak, that I would crumble. But they didn't know who I really was. Now I'm pulling the strings in this game, and they won't see me coming until it's too late. I once had everything. A beautiful home inherited from my parents, a thriving architectural firm, a wife I adored named Sarah, and Mark, a friend who was like a brother to me since childhood. We were the perfect trio, or at least, that was the illusion I lived in. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning. I placed my car keys on the kitchen counter before heading to shower, as I had done every day for years. When I returned, they weren't there. I found them 30 minutes later in my office drawer, a place I never would have put them. "You probably just forgot," Sarah said, her voice soft with concern. "You've been working so hard lately." I accepted her explanation because it made sense. Who would move keys? But then it happened again, and again. Small things, easily dismissed. My watch found in the guest bathroom, important design sketches rearranged on my desk, appointments suddenly missing from my calendar. "Are you sure we didn't agree to meet the Hendersons next Thursday?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed as I insisted we had scheduled it for Tuesday. "I clearly remember you saying Thursday. Should I be worried about these memory issues, David?" I wasn't worried, not yet, but I started paying attention. Mark came by more frequently, always when Sarah suggested it. I noticed how their conversations would pause when I entered a room, resuming with slightly different topics. "Hey, buddy," Mark would say, clapping my shoulder. "Sarah mentioned you forgot about your lunch with the city planner yesterday. Everything, all right?" I hadn't forgotten. I hadn't even had that lunch scheduled. But Mark and Sarah exchanged glances that made me question myself. We hosted a dinner party 6 weeks after the Keys incident. 10 guests, colleagues, and friends all enjoying Sarah's perfect hosting. I was at the bar preparing drinks when I overheard her in the kitchen. My father always said architects build dreams for others while forgetting to live in their own. Her laugh tinkled like glass. David's father was the same way before he died. Obsessed with legacy, never present. My father had been nothing like that. He had been warm, engaged, the man who taught me to fish and build model planes. He had died protecting a student during a campus shooting. The furthest thing from the cold, distant figure Sarah described. "That's not true," I said, entering the kitchen, drinks forgotten. "You know that's not who he was." Sarah's eyes widened, her hand fluttering to her chest. Our guests fell silent. "David, please," she whispered. "Not this again." "Not what again?" I had never contradicted her stories about my father before because she had never mischaracterized him so dramatically. "Sarah, my father was not obsessed with legacy. He was a professor who died saving a student's life." The silence in the room became oppressive. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Your father was an architect, David. He died of heart failure 3 years before we met. Remember? We visited his grave last Christmas." My mind reeled. This wasn't a small discrepancy, a misplaced item, a rescheduled appointment. This was my history, my identity being rewritten. I looked around the room. Every face reflected concern, discomfort, and something worse, pity. Only Mark moved, coming to stand beside Sarah, his arm around her shoulders. "Maybe we should call it a night," he suggested to our guests. "David's been under a lot of pressure at work." I stood frozen as our friends made awkward exits. Mark shepherded them out while Sarah dabbed at her eyes in the kitchen. I heard his voice at the door. "It's getting worse. She's been dealing with this for months now. We're trying to get him to see someone." They were talking about me like I was unstable, like I was losing my grip on reality. After everyone left, Sarah approached me cautiously. "I think we need to talk about getting you some help, David. These episodes are becoming more frequent." "Episodes?" I echoed. "This isn't an episode. You lied about my father." "Sweetheart, no." Her voice was patient, like she was speaking to a child. "Your father was Alan Mercer, architect. He designed the Collins building downtown. Your mother was Elizabeth. They died within a year of each other. You inherited their firm and this house. Those facts were correct, but not the rest. My father hadn't been distant. He hadn't died of heart failure. I knew this with absolute certainty. Yet doubt crept in. If Sarah and all our friends believed this version, was it possible I had constructed a different narrative? Was I romanticizing my father's death? No. That was ridiculous. I remembered the funeral, the newspaper articles, the Medal of Honor, but when I went to my office to find these items, the box where I kept them was filled instead with architectural awards and family photos I didn't recognize. Mark suggested I see Dr. Phillips, a psychiatrist friend of Sarah's family. I agreed, if only to prove nothing was wrong with me. But from the moment I sat in his office, I felt the trap closing. "Sarah tells me you've been experiencing memory inconsistencies, periods of confusion, some mild paranoia," Dr. Phillips said, not looking up from his notepad. "That's not accurate," I replied. "Things have been moved, appointments changed without my knowledge. It's not my memory that's the problem." Dr. Phillips nodded in a way that suggested he expected this exact response. Often when we experience cognitive disruptions, it's easier to believe external factors are the cause. I'd like to start you on a low dose of medication while we explore these issues. I left his office with a prescription and a deepening sense that something was very wrong, and it wasn't my mind. At home, Sarah was solicitous, making sure I took my first dose immediately. "This will help, darling," she said, watching me swallow the pill. "Dr. Phillips says we should see improvement within weeks." That night, I lay awake next to Sarah, reviewing everything that had happened. The missing keys, the rescheduled appointments, the dinner party, my father's story. Each incident seemed designed to make me question my perception, my memory, my sanity. If I wasn't careful, I would soon believe I was exactly what they were portraying me to be, a man unraveling. And I had a growing suspicion about who they were. My loving wife and my lifelong best friend were gaslighting me, systematically dismantling my reality piece by piece. The question was why? The pills Dr. Phillips prescribed left me feeling foggy, slow to react. I flushed most of them down the toilet each morning after pretending to take them at breakfast. Sarah watched me closely, her concern seemingly genuine, as she handed me water and waited for me to swallow. "How are you feeling today?" she would ask, studying my face for signs of the medication's effects. "Better," I lied. "Just tired." "That's normal at first. Dr. Phillips said it would take time for your body to adjust." I nodded and smiled blandly, playing the role of compliant patient while my mind remained sharp, observing everything. The isolation accelerated. Phone calls went unreturned because Sarah forgot to tell me people had called. Emails disappeared from my inbox. Client meetings were rescheduled without my knowledge, making me appear unreliable. My assistant at the firm, Jennifer, was let go, replaced by someone Sarah recommended, a pleasant woman named Diane who reported everything directly to my wife. "For continuity," Sarah explained, "in case you have another episode." Mark came, by daily now, always when Sarah was home. They spoke in hushed tones that stopped when I entered a room. Their concern was suffocating. Mark would pull me aside, his hand on my shoulder, voice low with manufactured sincerity. "How are you really doing, buddy? Sarah's worried sick. We all are." I told him I was fine, just adjusting to the medication. Each time he'd nod with the same look of disbelief Dr. Phillips had shown. My access to our finances became increasingly restricted. Sarah suggested consolidating our accounts to make things simpler. "It's just temporary," she assured me when, I hesitated. Until you're feeling more stable. I'll handle the bills and investments so you can focus on getting better. I agreed, watching as she transferred funds from my personal accounts into joint ones she controlled. I had inherited substantial wealth from my parents, including the architectural firm, our home, and investment portfolios. Now Sarah managed it all, ostensibly for my benefit. My computer began showing evidence of behavior I knew wasn't mine. Searches for signs of early onset dementia and paranoid personality disorder symptoms appeared in my browser history. Emails I had never written sat in my drafts folder, rambling messages to clients that would have destroyed my professional reputation if sent. I found credit card statements showing purchases I hadn't made, strange items delivered to our home that I hadn't ordered. When I confronted Sarah, she looked pained. "David, you ordered these last week. You don't remember?" Her voice trembled. "This is what I've been trying to tell you. These lapses are getting worse." I felt a cold clarity, even as I pretended confusion. Someone was accessing my accounts, making these purchases, conducting these searches, writing these emails. And it wasn't me. Dr. Phillips increased my dosage after Sarah reported my continued memory issues and growing paranoia. He spoke to me as if I were a child, explaining how the disease was progressing but could be managed with proper medication and possibly inpatient treatment. "There's an excellent facility my brother runs," he mentioned casually. "Very peaceful, excellent success rates with cases like yours." I nodded numbly, playing along while alarm bells rang in my head. A facility. They wanted to commit me. The next morning, Sarah had an early yoga class. She left my pills by the bedside with water and a note reminding me to take them. I flushed them as usual, then began searching the house systematically. Something didn't add up. Sarah and Mark's concern seemed excessive, their actions too coordinated. In our bedroom, I checked all the usual hiding places, finding nothing. I moved to Sarah's home office, careful not to disturb anything noticeably. Her desk contained only normal paperwork. Her filing cabinet was organized with typical Sarah precision. Nothing suspicious. As I turned to leave, I noticed her yoga mat by the door. Sarah never forgot her yoga mat for class. I checked the garage, and her car was gone, so she had definitely left for yoga, but without her mat. I returned to our bedroom and searched more thoroughly. In her nightstand, behind a stack of books, I found a small safe I'd never seen before. It required a fingerprint to open, making it inaccessible to me. A new addition, carefully hidden. Frustrated, I moved to the guest bathroom where Sarah had recently insisted on renovating. The medicine cabinet held standard items, but something about the cabinet itself seemed off. It was unusually deep. I removed everything from it and pressed against the back panel. It gave slightly. I pushed harder and it slid open, revealing a small space behind. Inside was a phone I'd never seen before, plugged into a concealed outlet. I unplugged it and turned it on. No password required. It opened immediately to a text conversation with Mark. My hands trembled as I scrolled through hundreds of messages spanning months. He totally believed the keys were in his office drawer. You should have seen his face. Sarah to Mark, 3 months ago. Phillips is on board. His brother's facility has a bed whenever we're ready. The meds are working. He's definitely slower. Mark to Sarah, 6 weeks ago. Dinner party went perfectly. Everyone thinks he's losing it. Jennifer's replacement will report directly to me. 2 more months of this and we'll have everything transferred. The competency hearing is scheduled. Love you. Sarah to Mark, 2 days after our dinner party. And most damning of all, a message from last night. Once he's committed, we should be able to liquidate most assets within 6 months. I can't wait to finally be together without pretending. Did you book the Maldives villa for January? We deserve it after all this work. I sat on the bathroom floor, the phone cold in my hand as years of friendship and marriage revealed themselves as an elaborate lie. The scope of their betrayal was breathtaking. This wasn't a recent development, but a long con, meticulously planned and executed. Sarah and Mark, lovers, systematically gaslighting me into doubting my own sanity, with the end goal of having me committed and stealing my inheritance. The shock gave way to something colder, more focused. I carefully returned the phone to its hiding place, ensuring everything looked untouched. Then I went to the kitchen and prepared coffee, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd discovered. When Sarah returned, cheeks flushed from yoga, I smiled blandly and asked if she had a good class. "Wonderful," she said, kissing my cheek. "How are you feeling?" "Bit foggy," I replied. "I think the new dosage is affecting me more." Her eyes lit up, though she tried to hide it. "That's to be expected. Your body will adjust." I nodded, playing the role she expected while internally everything had changed. I wasn't fighting to prove my sanity anymore. I was fighting for my freedom, my assets, and something more primal: justice. Sarah and Mark believed they were the puppet masters, crafting my downfall with precision. They didn't realize they'd created the perfect conditions for my counterattack. They expected confusion and compliance. They wouldn't be looking for calculation and strategy. As I sipped my coffee and listened to Sarah talk about her plans for the day, I made my own plan. I wouldn't confront them. I wouldn't flee. I would turn their own methods against them, becoming the perfect reflection of what they wanted to see, while secretly orchestrating their destruction. They thought I was the marionette. They were about to learn who really pulled the strings. I began my counter-strategy with a simple lined notebook, documenting every manipulation with clinical precision. Date, time, incident, witnesses, if any, and most importantly, potential evidence. I wrote in it when I knew I was alone, then hid it in a place they would never think to look, inside a hollowed-out architectural textbook in my office. This would be my true record. Then I created a decoy, a second journal filled with rambling, paranoid entries. This one I wrote while sitting in view of one of the tiny cameras I had discovered hidden throughout our home. I made sure my hand shook slightly as I wrote, occasionally muttering to myself. This journal I hid poorly, in my sock drawer under some rarely worn items. It would be found eventually, exactly as I intended. Playing the role of a man succumbing to mental illness required careful calibration. I appeared increasingly confused, but in specific ways that served my purpose. I'd forget names of people who could help me, but never failed to recognize Sarah and Mark. I'd lose track of time, but always remembered where my medication was. I became the patient they wanted, while my mind remained razor sharp. I needed allies, but approaching anyone directly would be dangerous. Sarah monitored my calls, emails, and movements. Mark had spread the narrative of my decline throughout our social circle. Anyone I contacted would likely report back to them, concerned for my well-being. I found my first opportunity 3 weeks after discovering Sarah's phone. Sarah mentioned that Emma Miller, an old college friend who had become an investigative journalist, was in town working on a story. She might stop by, Sarah said casually. I hope that's okay. I know you're not up for many visitors these days. I recognized the perfect opening. Emma? That would be nice. She was always interesting to talk to. Sarah looked slightly surprised at my enthusiasm but nodded. I'll tell her to come for lunch tomorrow. Emma arrived the next day, her sharp eyes taking in everything. Sarah hovered nearby as we exchanged pleasantries, but when she went to the kitchen to prepare lunch, I made my move. I've been following your work, I said, my voice normal, not the slower cadence I used around Sarah. That piece you did on medical fraud was brilliant. Emma's eyebrows rose slightly. Thank you. It was challenging getting people to go on record. I can imagine. Hypothetically, how would someone document being gaslit by medical professionals and family members, asking for a story idea I had? Her eyes sharpened. She glanced toward the kitchen, then back at me. Hypothetically, they would need multiple forms of evidence. Recordings, written documentation with timestamps, witness testimony from unbiased sources, financial records showing unusual activity. Sarah returned, and our conversation shifted to safer topics. But before Emma left, she pressed a business card into my hand. If you ever want to discuss that story idea further. My next ally required more careful maneuvering. Michael Reeves had been my parents' attorney and the executor of their will. I had maintained a professional relationship with him over the years, but hadn't consulted him recently. I needed to see him without arousing suspicion. I waited until Sarah was discussing our finances one evening, then mentioned casually, "I should update my will. With everything happening, it seems prudent." Sarah tried to hide her interest. "Is that necessary right now? You have so much on your plate already." "It's been on my mind. I'd like to speak with Michael about it. Would you schedule it for me? My calendar is so confusing these days." She agreed too quickly, likely seeing an opportunity to monitor the meeting. As expected, she insisted on accompanying me to Michael's office the following week. Michael greeted us warmly, though I noticed his careful assessment as we settled into his office. Sarah explained my condition briefly, suggesting she stay for the meeting to help David remember the details. "Actually," I said, adopting my confused persona, "I'd prefer to speak with Michael alone first. Legal matters, you know." I gave her a vague smile. "Private things. You understand?" Sarah hesitated, clearly torn between suspicion and maintaining her caring facade. Eventually she nodded. "Of course, I'll wait in the reception area." Once she left, I leaned forward, dropping all pretense of confusion. "Michael, I have very little time. I need your help, but you cannot show any indication to my wife or anyone else that we've had this conversation." His expression remained neutral, professional. "What's going on, David?" In quick, precise sentences, I outlined the situation, the gaslighting, the affair, the plot to have me committed, their plans for my assets. I showed him selected text screenshots I had managed to take from Sarah's hidden phone. I need to protect my assets without their knowledge and prepare for a competency hearing they're planning. Can you help me? Michael's face had grown increasingly grave. "This is extremely serious, David. And yes, I can help. We'll need to move carefully." We spent the next 20 minutes discussing legal strategies. He advised creating an irrevocable trust for my most valuable assets that neither Sarah nor anyone else could access or modify once established. He also suggested gathering evidence for countercharges of abuse and fraudulent misrepresentation. "The competency hearing cuts both ways," he explained. "If we can prove they deliberately manufactured evidence of your mental decline, it becomes elder abuse, despite your relatively young age." When Sarah returned, we presented a carefully crafted narrative about updates to my will that included charitable donations, nothing that would alarm her. Michael maintained the perfect balance of professional and paternal, treating me exactly as Sarah would expect given my condition. As we left, Michael shook my hand firmly. "I'll have those documents prepared within the week, David. Take care of yourself." The pieces of my defense were falling into place, but I still faced the daily challenge of appearing to take medication that would genuinely impair me. I had developed various techniques, from hiding pills under my tongue to palming them during Sarah's increasingly vigilant supervision. The medication problem became more challenging when Sarah began crushing pills into my food, a tactic I discovered only because I had become paranoid about everything I consumed. I started preparing my own meals whenever possible, claiming it helped me feel more in control. When that wasn't an option, I ate minimally or found ways to dispose of suspicious food. My apparent mental decline accelerated in ways that satisfied Sarah and Mark while actually giving me more freedom. As I became less reliable, Sarah spent more time away from home, often meeting Mark under the pretext of discussing my care. These absences gave me critical windows to work on my counter-strategy. During one such absence, I carefully accessed Sarah's hidden phone again and took photos of key conversations with my own concealed phone. One I had purchased through Michael and kept hidden in my office. The evidence was damning. Detailed plans between Sarah, Mark, and Dr. Phillips to manipulate my diagnosis, medication, and eventually secure a competency ruling that would give Sarah control over all my affairs. I also discovered they planned to have me committed to Lakeside Retreat, a private mental health facility owned by Dr. Phillips's brother, within the month. The timeline was accelerating faster than I had anticipated. That night, I began the next phase of my plan. As Sarah slept beside me, I lay awake, my mind clear and focused despite the challenges ahead. They thought they were dismantling me piece by piece, but instead, they had provided me the perfect cover to build my case against them. In their arrogance, they had created their own downfall. Invisibility can be a powerful advantage when you know how to use it. I was in my study pretending to struggle with simple architectural drawings when Sarah entered with her practiced look of concern. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, her touch feeling like ice against my skin now that I knew the truth. "David, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice soft and controlled. "Dr. Phillips and I have been discussing your care, and we think it might be time for more intensive treatment." I looked up with the confused expression I had perfected. "More treatment, but I'm taking the pills." "I know, sweetheart, but sometimes that's not enough." She sat beside me, taking my hand in hers. "There's a wonderful facility called Lakeside Retreat. Dr. Phillips' brother runs it. It's peaceful with expert care, and you could focus completely on getting better." "You want me to leave home?" I injected just the right amount of fear and confusion into my voice. "Just temporarily," she soothed. 3 weeks from now, we have a meeting with a judge. It's called a competency hearing, just a formality to get you the help you need. After that, you'll go to Lakeside for specialized treatment." 3 weeks. They had accelerated their timeline even more than I had discovered. I needed to move faster. "A judge?" I whispered, allowing my hands to tremble slightly. "Am I in trouble?" "No, not at all," she assured me, squeezing my hand. "It's just a legal step to make sure you get proper care. I'll handle everything. Mark will be there to support us too." "I'm sure he will," I thought coldly while maintaining my facade of vulnerability. "If you think it's best," I murmured. Her smile was triumphant beneath the sympathy. "I do. Now why don't you rest while I make some calls?" As soon as she left, I sent a prearranged signal to Michael via text, a seemingly innocent message about gardening that indicated I needed to meet urgently. Then I placed a call to Emma, knowing Sarah would check my phone records. "Emma, it's David Mercer. I was wondering if you might be interested in commissioning some conceptual drawings for that project you mentioned." The project was fictional, but the call would appear legitimate. If Sarah investigated, Emma understood immediately. "I'd be very interested. Can we meet tomorrow to discuss details? Say, 1 p.m. at the Riverside Cafe?" "Perfect. I'll bring some preliminary sketches." After disconnecting, I opened my laptop and began the process of appearing to research mental health facilities, while actually sending encrypted messages to Michael through a system he had set up. I detailed the accelerated timeline and arranged for him to attend the competency hearing with a complete legal strategy in place. The next day, Sarah was surprisingly willing to let me meet Emma alone. "It's good for you to maintain professional connections," she said. "Just don't tire yourself out." Her confidence was growing dangerously. She believed I was fully under control, too medicated and confused to pose any threat to their plans. This overconfidence would be her downfall. At the Riverside Cafe, I briefed Emma on the latest developments while pretending to discuss architectural concepts. She took notes, her expression remaining professionally neutral despite the alarming content. "Just to be clear," she said quietly, "you have evidence that your wife, your best friend, and your psychiatrist are conspiring to have you committed fraudulently to gain control of your assets?" "Comprehensive evidence," I confirmed. "Text messages detailing their plan, financial records showing unusual transfers, recordings of conversations, and witnesses to their systematic isolation tactics." Emma's eyes glinted with the intensity that had made her a formidable journalist. "I've been looking into Dr. Phillips since our last conversation. He has a pattern of treating wealthy patients whose assets are subsequently managed by family members he's closely connected with. Nothing proven yet, but definitely suspicious. Could you have something publishable before the competency hearing?" She nodded slowly. "With your evidence added to what I've already gathered, absolutely. But David, you realize this will destroy their reputations, their careers? There's no coming back from this kind of exposure." I met her gaze steadily. They were willing to erase my existence, Emma. To lock me away while they lived on my inheritance. They deserve what's coming. Back at home, I continued my careful performance, appearing increasingly disoriented while secretly preparing for the confrontation to come. I allowed Sarah to find my decoy journal during one of her regular searches of my belongings. Her theatrical gasp alerted me that she had discovered it exactly as I planned. I entered our bedroom to find her holding the journal, her expression, a calculated mix of concern and vindication. "David, what is this?" She held up the notebook filled with paranoid ramblings I had created for her to find. I reacted with alarm, trying to grab it from her. "That's private, you shouldn't read that." She pulled it away, her eyes scanning the pages. "David, these thoughts aren't rational. You write here that Mark and I are conspiring against you. That we're trying to steal your money?" Her voice trembled perfectly. "This is exactly what Dr. Phillips warned might happen with your condition." I slumped onto the bed, head in my hands. I get confused sometimes. The thoughts just come and I have to write them down to make them stop. She sat beside me, journal clutched to her chest. "I'm going to have to show this to Dr. Phillips. You understand that, right? He needs to know how you're really feeling." I nodded miserably, the perfect image of a man caught in his delusions. Inside, I felt a cold satisfaction. The journal contained exactly what I wanted them to see, reinforcing their belief in my psychosis while containing nothing that would genuinely help their case if scrutinized by an objective authority. The next morning, Mark arrived early, summoned by Sarah. They sat me down in the living room, the decoy journal on the coffee table between us. "Buddy, we're worried about you," Mark began, his concern as false as everything else about him. "These thoughts you're having, they're symptoms of your condition. I know you're sleeping with Sarah," I said suddenly, watching their expressions carefully. "I know you both want my money." The flash of panic that crossed their faces was quickly masked. They exchanged a look I was meant to see, confirming for each other that my accusation was merely another delusion. "See what I mean?" Sarah said. To Mark, "This is getting worse." She turned to me. "David, Mark and I are friends. We're both concerned about you, that's all. No one wants your money." I allowed tears to well in my eyes. I don't know what's real anymore. I'm scared. Mark leaned forward, the picture of compassionate friendship. "That's why we want you to get help at Lakeside. It's peaceful there. You can rest and get the treatment you need." I nodded slowly, as if finally accepting their narrative. Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need help. The relief on their faces was palpable. They believed they had won, that I had finally surrendered to their manipulation. Sarah called Dr. Phillips immediately to report my breakthrough, while Mark stayed close, watching me with what appeared to be genuine concern to anyone who didn't know better. I retreated to my study afterward, maintaining the appearance of a man resigned to his fate. In reality, I was finalizing details with Michael via our secure communication channel. The irrevocable trust protecting my key assets was already established. Emma's investigation into Dr. Phillips was nearing publication. All pieces were in position for the competency hearing that would become their undoing rather than mine. That night I allowed myself a small, private smile as I laid in bed next to the woman who had betrayed me so completely. 3 more weeks of this charade, and then I would reveal who had truly been in control all along. I began implementing the next phase of my counter-strategy with surgical precision. With Sarah and Mark convinced of my surrender to their narrative, they grew increasingly careless around me. They saw what they expected to see, a broken man too medicated and confused to comprehend their machinations. Their mistake. My greatest advantage. I started with Mark, exploiting his deep-seated insecurities about Sarah's loyalty. During one of his daily visits, I waited until Sarah left the room to get coffee, then leaned toward him with unfocused eyes. "She calls him when you're not here," I whispered, my voice slurred as if heavily medicated. Mark's expression sharpened. "Calls who, David?" I blinked slowly, appearing to struggle with my thoughts. The man. The one she laughs with, not you. Someone else. Before he could probe further, Sarah returned and I retreated into vacant staring. Mark said nothing, but I caught him watching Sarah more closely when she checked her phone later that evening. The seed was planted. For Sarah, I chose a different approach, targeting her financial concerns. I knew from her texts with Mark that she worried about accessing certain accounts after I was committed. While reviewing financial documents with her, a task she now handled largely without my input, I pointed to a particular investment portfolio worth several million. I moved that, I mumbled. Mark asked me to sign papers for it last week. Sarah's pen stilled. What papers, David? What did Mark ask you to sign? I frowned as if struggling to recall. For the money. He said it needed to be somewhere safer. I trusted him, so I signed. The portfolio hadn't moved, of course, but Sarah spent the next hour on her laptop, checking accounts with growing agitation. I noticed her sending several texts, presumably to Mark. His replies must have been unsatisfactory, judging by her tightening expression. The fissures in their alliance were forming. Meanwhile, I had been quietly installing my own surveillance system throughout the house during their absences. Tiny cameras and microphones, far more sophisticated than their amateur attempts, recorded their every interaction when they thought they were alone. The evidence was damning. 3 more weeks of the charade, Sarah told Mark in our kitchen, unaware I was recording every word. The hearing is just a formality. Phillips has the judge in his pocket. And David has no idea? Mark asked, pouring himself a generous scotch. My scotch. Sarah laughed, the sound like breaking glass. None. He actually thinks he's going to Lakeside for treatment. He'll be lucky if he remembers his own name after they're done with him. What about the Masons Foundation account? Did you get access yet? Working on it, Sarah replied, tension evident. Speaking of which, did you ask David to sign any documents last week about moving investments? Mark's confusion was genuine. No, why would I do that? He said you did, that you moved money somewhere safer. That's ridiculous, you know, how confused he is. Sarah studied him with new suspicion. Yes, but he's been oddly specific lately about certain things, and that account actually does show unusual activity from last month. Well, it wasn't me, Mark snapped. Maybe you should keep better track of the finances if you're so concerned. Their conversation devolved into thinly veiled accusations, each questioning the other's commitment to their plan. I watched the recording later with cold satisfaction. They were turning on each other exactly as I had designed. I continued my careful campaign, dropping strategic comments to each of them individually. To Mark, suggestions of Sarah's growing closeness with Dr. Phillips. To Sarah, hints about Mark's discussions with my attorney without her knowledge. None of these things were happening, of course, but they believed they could be, which was all that mattered. 2 weeks before the hearing, I arranged another meeting with Michael under the pretext of finalizing my will changes. Sarah insisted on coming along but agreed to wait in the reception area. After I claimed I needed to discuss private charitable donations that I wanted to surprise her with later. Inside Michael's office, I reviewed our strategy for the hearing. The trust is secure, Michael confirmed. All your major assets and the controlling interest in the firm were transferred before she began restricting your access. She can't touch them even if she somehow wins at the hearing. And the surveillance evidence? Substantial. The recordings clearly show conspiracy to commit fraud, potential medical malpractice by Dr. Phillips, and intention to administer drugs without proper consent at Lakeside. Combined with the financial documentation showing their attempted transfers, it's more than enough. Emma's investigation? Ready to publish the day before the hearing, she's found 3 other patients of Dr. Phillips who were committed under similar circumstances with family members connected to him gaining control of their assets. 2 have since died under questionable circumstances at Lakeside. I absorbed this with grim determination. The stakes were even higher than I had realized. This wasn't just about my freedom and assets, but potentially my life. Is everything in place for the hearing itself? Michael nodded. Judge Warner will preside. I've requested specific expert witnesses who have no connection to Phillips. I've also submitted a motion to have you evaluated by an independent psychiatrist before the proceedings. Sarah was increasingly anxious as the hearing approached. I caught her having hushed argumentative phone calls with both Mark and Dr. Phillips. The alliance was fraying visibly now, each member growing suspicious of the others as my carefully planted doubts took root. 10 days before the hearing, Sarah discovered that several large accounts she thought she controlled had been moved to the irrevocable trust. She confronted me during dinner, her composure finally cracking. "What did you do with the money, David?" she demanded, abandoning all pretense of concern. "The Barrett Foundation account, the property holdings, they're gone." I blinked at her with vacant confusion. Gone? Did Mark take them? He said he needed to protect things. Her face flushed with rage. "Stop saying that. Mark hasn't touched anything. You did something with those accounts, didn't you? You're not as confused as you're pretending to be." I allowed genuine fear to show on my face. "You're scaring me. Sarah, maybe we should call Dr. Phillips if you're feeling unstable." The role reversal was not lost on her. She stormed out, immediately calling Mark. Their argument was loud enough for me to hear without surveillance, accusations flying between them about missing funds and betrayal. A week before the hearing, Emma published her exposé on Dr. Phillips and Lakeside Retreat. The article revealed a pattern of wealthy patients being diagnosed with serious mental conditions shortly after coming under his care, followed by rapid deterioration once admitted to Lakeside. Family members connected to Phillips invariably gained control of their assets. The piece didn't mention me specifically, as we had agreed, but the implications were clear to anyone following my case. Phillips' phone rang constantly that day. Many calls went unanswered. When Sarah finally reached him, their conversation was tense and brief. "Fix this," I heard her hiss into the phone. "The hearing is in 6 days." Mark arrived later, agitated and reeking of alcohol. "Have you seen this?" he demanded, throwing a printout of Emma's article onto the coffee table. "Phillips is being investigated. The hearing might be delayed." "We can't afford delays," Sarah snapped. "Everything's falling apart. The accounts, the article, the judge requesting a second opinion. Someone is working against us." I sat quietly in my armchair, the perfect picture of medicated oblivion, while, inside, I celebrated their unraveling. My apparent helplessness had become my greatest weapon. They had underestimated me completely, never imagining that their perfectly engineered victim could become the architect of their destruction. As they argued, casting blame and suspicion on each other, I maintained my vacant stare, occasionally mumbling non-sequiturs that further inflamed their paranoia, the puppeteer watching his marionettes dance, strings invisible but utterly controlling. 3 days before the hearing, Sarah received notification that Judge Warner was requiring testimony from 3 independent psychiatric experts, none connected, to Dr. Phillips. She threw her phone across the room in frustration, no longer bothering to hide her true nature from me. "This isn't happening," she seethed, pacing the living room while I watched with seemingly dull eyes. This was supposed to be simple. Simple, I thought with cold amusement. They had thought breaking me would be simple. They were about to discover how wrong they had been. The pieces were set. The trap was ready. In 3 days the stage would be theirs, but the performance would be mine. The morning of the competency hearing dawned with a crystalline clarity that matched my state of mind. I dressed carefully in a suit that hung slightly loose on my frame, the result of weight lost during my ordeal. The effect was deliberate, making me appear diminished, vulnerable. Sarah hovered nervously, adjusting my tie with shaking hands. "Remember to let me and Dr. Phillips do most of the talking," she instructed. "Just answer questions simply if the judge addresses you directly." I nodded docilely. "I understand. You know what's best for me." Her smile was tight, strained. The past week had taken its toll. Her carefully constructed image of loving concern had cracked under the pressure of Emma's article, the financial irregularities she couldn't explain, and Mark's increasingly erratic behavior. She looked exhausted, the architect of a collapsing scheme. Mark met us at the courthouse, dark circles under his eyes. He barely acknowledged me. his attention fixed entirely on Sarah. The tension between them was palpable, a live wire ready to spark. "Phillips is already inside," he muttered, "with his attorney." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "His attorney?" We agreed to present a united front. "Things have changed," Mark replied tersely. "The medical board contacted him yesterday about Emma's article. He's covering himself." We entered the courtroom to find it more crowded than expected. Besides Judge Warner, a distinguished woman with perceptive eyes, there were 3 independent psychiatric experts seated to one side. Dr. Phillips sat with an attorney I didn't recognize, deliberately separated from us. Michael waited at the defendant's table, his expression professionally neutral as we approached. "Michael," Sarah acknowledged coldly, "I'm surprised to see you here. This isn't really a legal matter requiring counsel." "On the contrary," Michael replied smoothly. "As David's longtime attorney, I have a professional obligation to ensure his interests are properly represented in any proceeding affecting his legal status." Before Sarah could respond, Judge Warner called the hearing to order. The proceedings began with Dr. Phillips presenting his evaluation, describing my supposed symptoms, deterioration, and need for intensive treatment. He spoke with practiced authority, but I noticed a slight tremor in his hands as he referenced his notes. Sarah testified next, painting a heartbreaking picture of my decline. She described finding my paranoid journal, my confusion over basic tasks, my accusations against her and Mark. Her performance was flawless, tears precisely timed, concern perfectly calibrated. Mark followed, corroborating Sarah's account while subtly emphasizing his own role as supportive friend. He carefully avoided any statement that might implicate him in impropriety, a fact not lost on Sarah, whose expression tightened as he spoke. Throughout their testimonies, I maintained my carefully crafted persona, appearing confused but attentive, occasionally writing nonsensical notes that Sarah could see from her position. The perfect embodiment of their fabricated narrative. When the prosecution rested, Michael stood. "Your Honor, before the independent experts present their evaluations, I would like to introduce evidence relevant to Mr. Mercer's mental state and this proceeding." Judge Warner nodded. "Proceed, Counselor." "First, I would like to call Ms. Emma Miller to the stand." Sarah's head snapped toward me, the first flicker of real fear in her eyes. I met her gaze with a clarity she hadn't seen in months, and watched, understanding dawn like a terrible sunrise. Emma took the stand and was sworn in. Under Michael's questioning, she outlined her investigation into Dr. Phillips, the pattern of wealthy patients diagnosed with similar conditions, their subsequent commitment to Lakeside Retreat, and the financial benefits that accrued to family members connected to Phillips. "And did your investigation include any communication with David Mercer?" Michael asked. "Yes," Emma confirmed. "Mr. Mercer contacted me 3 months ago with concerns about his medical treatment. He was lucid, organized, and provided detailed documentation supporting his claims." The courtroom stirred. Dr. Phillips leaned urgently toward his attorney. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sarah sat rigid, her knuckles white. Michael continued methodically, introducing financial records showing Sarah's systematic attempts to transfer my assets, phone records documenting her frequent communications with Mark at times she claimed to be elsewhere, and the medical documentation, revealing Dr. Phillips's deviation from standard diagnostic protocols. "Your Honor," Michael said, "I would now like to present audio and video evidence collected by Mr. Mercer over the past 3 months." The lights dimmed and a screen lowered. The recordings played with devastating clarity. Sarah and Mark discussing their plan to have me committed, laughing about my confusion, planning their future with my inheritance. Dr. Phillips advising them on medication to increase my symptoms. Sarah admitting the judge was in Phillips's pocket, a statement that caused Judge Warner's expression to harden dangerously. When the lights came up, the courtroom was silent. Sarah stared straight ahead, her face bloodless. Mark had physically distanced himself from her as if proximity itself was damning. Dr. Phillips studied his hands, defeated. "Finally," Michael said quietly, "I would like David Mercer to address the court." I stood straightening my shoulders and walked to the witness stand with a steadiness that contradicted months of apparent decline. After being sworn in, I turned to face the judge. "Your Honor," I began, my voice clear and strong. "For the past 4 months, I have been the victim of a coordinated campaign to have me declared mentally incompetent in order to gain control of my inheritance and business holdings. I detailed the gaslighting, the manipulation, the isolation. I explained how I had discovered their plot through Sarah's hidden phone and my decision to play along while gathering evidence. I described the specific methods I had used to avoid, the medication they tried to force on me, and my systematic documentation of their conspiracy. I am of sound mind, Your Honor. I have never experienced the symptoms they described. Every instance of confusion or paranoia was carefully performed to make them believe their plan was working, while I built my case against them. The 3 independent psychiatrists who had evaluated me the previous day confirmed my account. None had found evidence of the conditions Dr. Phillips had diagnosed. All agreed I showed no signs of cognitive impairment or paranoid delusions. As my testimony concluded, the carefully constructed alliance between the conspirators shattered completely. "She was the one who planned everything," Mark blurted, pointing at Sarah. "She approached me with the idea after she found out about the full extent of David's inheritance." Sarah's composure finally broke. "That's a lie. You came to me, said we could be together if we got rid of him. You said Lakeside would keep him so drugged he'd never be able to function again." Dr. Phillips attempted to distance himself, claiming he had been misled about my symptoms, but the evidence was overwhelming. Judge Warner's expression grew increasingly severe as their accusations flew across the courtroom, each revelation more damning than the last. "Enough," Judge Warner finally declared, silencing the chaos. "Based on the evidence presented, I am not only dismissing this competency petition, but referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Dr. Phillips, Mrs. Mercer and Mr. Landers are to surrender their passports immediately and make themselves available for questioning." She turned to me, her expression softening slightly. "Mr. Mercer, the court apologizes for what you have endured. You are free to go, with the court's full acknowledgement of your competence." As we left the courtroom, reporters gathered outside, alerted by Emma's recent article. Sarah, Mark, and Dr. Phillips were escorted out separately by court officers, their faces ashen as cameras flashed. Michael guided me through the crowd to his waiting car. "That went even better than expected," he commented as we pulled away. "The criminal charges will be substantial: conspiracy, attempted fraud, medical malpractice for Phillips." I nodded, watching the courthouse recede in the side mirror. "What about the trust we established? Can I dissolve it now?" "You can, but I recommend waiting until the criminal proceedings conclude. Better to keep those assets protected a while longer." In the weeks that followed, the case became a media sensation. Sarah, Mark, and Dr. Phillips faced multiple criminal charges. Phillips's medical license was suspended pending investigation, and his brother's facility, Lakeside Retreat, was placed under external administration after other patients showed signs of improper treatment. 3 months after the hearing, I attended Sarah's sentencing. She had accepted a plea deal, admitting to conspiracy and attempted fraud in exchange for testimony against Mark and Dr. Phillips. As the judge announced her 7-year sentence, her eyes found mine in the courtroom. I met her gaze steadily, neither triumphant nor vengeful, simply present to witness justice served. Her expression crumpled as she finally recognized the full measure of her miscalculation, underestimating the man she had tried to destroy. Outside the courthouse, Emma approached me. "What will you do now?" I considered her question carefully. "I'm establishing a foundation to help victims of psychological abuse and manipulation, people who've been gaslit, isolated, made to question their own reality." "And the house, will you stay there?" "No. Too many memories. I've donated Sarah's portion of our assets to build a mental health advocacy center where her parents' home used to stand in her hometown. It feels fitting somehow, a place of genuine healing rising from the roots of her deception." Emma nodded, understanding the poetry of this final move in a game Sarah never realized we were playing. As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in months. The puppeteers had become the puppets, their strings cut, their performance ended. My name cleared, my freedom secured, my future reclaimed through patience, precision, and the perfect reflection of their own manipulation. They had tried to write my ending. Instead, I had composed theirs.